it's a good time is I'm writing an article for next month's News from the Hill. What percentage of the Holy Land do you think is Christian? 2%.
Two.
2%.
Wow.
And going down. It's estimated that probably in 20 years there'll be no Christians in the Holy Land, which is quite interesting. Many today, a couple million, have migrated from Syria to where? Lebanon. And today we find there's more Christians in Lebanon than any other place over there. So I think it's a good time to go. A lot of people have asked me if I think it's safe, and I think yes, it is safe. I think there's better security in some of those sites than there is here. A lot of undercover agents that are there. And the Muslims, you ready for this? This is hold on to the front of your chairs, folks, are buying a lot of the religious sites, like the Church of the Ascension and Mary and Martha's house in Bethany. So they don't want problems either. The only thing I would not advise you to do is get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm going to go for a walk through Old Jerusalem or something like that. That may be a better maybe it's better to do that some other time. And of course, wear comfortable shoes. So what we're going to do this week and next week is I'm going to take you on a short virtual tour of what those who are going on their pilgrimage to the Holy Land in February will explore. And I built a document like this for this week, a document for next week, and your document is in printing right now. It's 120 pages. And what I always try to do is to put the parts of the Bible that are relevant, okay, in here. Because what makes the experience good is, for example, when you go someplace like the Church of the Beatitudes, is to do what? Read the Beatitudes. And you can do that today so easily, simply by putting an app on your phone. There's lots of good Bible apps, and they're free. So you can take the app with you, and we'll have a lot of the references in here. Also, when you go to Cana, hopefully Jill has gotten you a chapel, and we always do renewal of marriage vows. I wrote a little service for that, and it's really kind of fun to be in Cana and renew your vows. So there's a short version of this document. This is part of it. There's another short version for the second part of it next week, and we can't go through every bit of it. We'd be here for a week. That's okay with me. Do you want to hang out? Okay. But anyway, hopefully it'll all be bound for you guys to know. So I always start with a map. I like to start with a map. And showing where Israel is. And as you know, it's surrounded by Muslim countries. And there's also a radical difference between the north and the south. You are going to the south, down to the Dead Sea. And as we get to the south and to the west, where we have the Gaza Strip, you can see it on the left. A lot of people down there are constantly under a missile attack. So don't get worried. We don't go that far south. Okay, don't go far that south. The furthest south they'll go is to the Dead Sea. Okay, and that's where you'll get to see Quran. Okay, and where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But you will spend time in this area called the West Bank, where Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Jericho are. And I've got a couple of slides in here, and I can tell you if you want an experience, go to the West Bank, and it's very much like going to the worst part of Tijuana you could probably find. Okay. One of my favorite stories over there is you'll see a wall with more security on it than you can possibly imagine, and it's very impoverished. And the people there are very much persecuted by the Israelis, especially when it comes to going out of the country and coming back in. There's very tight controls on them and going across the border. So you'll be going into Tel Aviv, where the airport security is some of the best in the world. Learn not to worry about men and women carrying Uzis and ARs. It's kind of a common thing over there. Okay, they get on the bus, they get off the bus, there's just a lot of security. And it's probably one of the safest airports in the world because they do racial profiling with images. And so they have a lot of technology in that area. So never worry about going into Tel Aviv. Okay, and going into the West Bank is safe as well. We only go to safe places. And we'll be up at Nazareth, and you'll come all the way south, up on the Sea of Galilee on both sides. The only thing on this trip you're not doing, there's great speculation in Scripture about where Jesus was baptized. We know he was baptized on the Jordan, right? But there's arguments about was he baptized from the Jordan side or from the Israeli side. I tend to think it's probably the Jordan side. But you're going to get a kick out of seeing baptismal sites because a lot of them, you can go rent an Al White to get baptized for $1, a couple dollars. Okay? And you can get baptized again. Do you have to be baptized again? No. No. One baptism. So I wouldn't advise doing that. You know, it's very big in the evangelical circles. People wait to go over there to be baptized. And probably you can see the Jordan side. That's probably even more privacy. So every document has this map in it, okay, and it'll show you where to go. I put some history in here. If you go to page 3, the history of Jerusalem. You can read through it, but some of the key points. It first was settled in 3500 BCE. Think about that, okay? First temple was built in 960 by Solomon. It was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, right? The destruction of the temple, right? You remember that? It was rebuilt in 516 by Nehemiah, the last book in the Hebrew Bible. It talks about Nehemiah going back and building the new temple. It wasn't as elaborate as the first temple. Now, did we ever find the first temple? No. So we're really not sure what it looks like. Okay, and then of course Herod rebuilt some of the second temple, and in 37 BCE. So these dates are kind of key, okay, and it's a nice place to see all the dates in one place. In one place. Particularly significant is the destruction of the temple. And when was the temple destroyed? 70. And part of that Wailing Wall, that western wall, is what's still there. Okay. On the next page, you see some history dates. Okay, which are good because you'll see a lot of dates over there, and they'll tell you when things were built and where they were built. And it's nice to have some understanding about when that happened in history and the other things that were happening in the world. So this chart helps you do that. And then, of course, the Herod dynasty, which comes out of the Hasmonean Empire. There were many Herods, Herod the Great, Herod Agrippa, and the others. And you'll see those names historically over there. The other thing you'll also see if you go to the Holy Land with me especially, you'll see Bishop Kaffidi's name plastered all over the place. And that's one of the wonderful things to do, knowing about his ministry there and his ministry here. But St. George's is great for that, and several of the other places in Ramallah. He started a school for children in Ramallah that trains kids in basic skills like electricity, plumbing, masonry, what have you, cooking, and they do very well. So this is the little history of the Herod dynasty I'd like to look at. Okay, now we know why Jerusalem is important, because it is the central spiritual place for the 3 monotheistic religions, which are those 3. Okay? And that becomes part of the problem. Because if we look at the Dome of the Rock, at the bottom of this Temple of Mecca, that mosque, where they've changed that dome several times, it's now coated in gold, that is supposedly where Muhammad was taken up to heaven, shown a glimpse of heaven. So it's a very holy religious place to them, as well as for Christians and for Jews. Some people think the Ark of the Covenant is buried around there someplace, from the Knights Templar and the Crusades. You can decide for yourself. Okay? But there's a great conflict over this. Everybody claims that one place, okay, to be theirs, and that's part of the whole problem. So anyway, you'll really enjoy seeing that, and you can almost feel this tension when you're there. Okay, between Islam and between Christian, you can feel it if you look for it. So here's the history of the Dome of the Rock. Okay, it's an important place. Okay, the light shines off it in a very specific way. Okay, it's got beautiful mosaics on it and in it. I don't think you'll get inside the mosque. We did last time. We didn't get inside the mosque. They don't always let you in there. But you can get up to the Wailing Wall, which is the last part of the wall standing from the 70 CE. And you go to the Wailing Wall, and it's divided between women and men. I hate to say it, guys. All right? There's one side for women, there's one side for men. But one of the things you can do that's a nice tradition is you write a little prayer. You fold the prayer up, and you stick it in one of the cracks in the wall. And if you're standing at the Wailing Wall and you look to the left, okay, you will see this entrance into where all the rabbis pray. And you can go in there. I'd make sure you find some time to go in there as well. It's quite a place. When you're at that Wailing Wall, you realize that that's what's left from the last temple. And that's what I like about taking people there. It makes Scripture come alive, right? Makes Scripture come alive. The first few days are mostly spent in Jerusalem. Go to page 8. The Mount of Olives. We often see it in the New Testament. It's where Jesus wept over Jerusalem. And again in here, Holly and Ned, you'll see I put in there the scriptural reference. I probably have most of them in there. So if you take Scripture and you do that, I encourage you all to go to these places and read when you go. Read Scripture with it, because what that does is, everyone says to me, we read a lot of Scripture in church. How much do we understand? How much of it do we understand in context? Right? Why, for example, is there, it was the wrong reading, by the way, why do we see a reading from Samuel and the reading about Jesus at the temple and how Jesus is called? Why do we see those on the same day? It's supposed to be 1 John, by the way, the prologue of John. We see them because when that was written by Luke, they would have understood what Samuel went through and how he was called. So that would have been, may not be true, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But they were writing things in the Gospels to have them relate to the people who were there and what they knew. So the Mount of Olives is really a cool place. And the other thing that, another one I like is the Church of the Paternoster. This is where Jesus taught the disciples the Lord's Prayer. Now here's the key. Don't think it was right there where he was standing. There's a big, don't get excited about that. It's in or around this place, maybe somewhere. In or around this place, maybe. So Mark, you're a good architect. You're going to have fun over there. Because when you want to come back, and how did they cut these walls so closely that they fit so close together with hand tools? And if you really are looking at the architecture, you'll look at it through different eyes than someone else will look at it. It's absolutely astounding. But where Jesus taught the Lord's Prayer, in that church, they have every language of the world in the Lord's Prayer is in there on the wall. So that's a nice thing to be able to go see and do. There's a lot of climbing, up and down. Not excessive, but make sure you have good walking shoes. Everyone says, I'm going to get new shoes for when I go to the Holy Land. And I say, don't you dare. Take shoes that fit you comfortably. And if you're going to buy new shoes, if you got to have new shoes, my advice is wear them a good period of time beforehand so that they're not new when you get there. So you're going to spend almost 3-4 days. Page 9, Chapel of the Ascension, and don't be familiar with Jesus wept. Okay? Chapel of the Ascension is where we read that Jesus ascended after the great 40 days. Okay? And by the way, it was built during the Crusader period, which was, and here's why the timing is in there. You'll hear them say, this was built during the Crusader period, Crusades. When was that? 1099?
Yeah, about 1300 maybe.
About 1300. Only one crusade was reasonably successful, and that was the first one. And for you guys and women who are military experts, you can understand why, because they couldn't maintain the logistics chain. They couldn't keep it supported. And so it was mainly the Knights, Knights Templar and others who waged that battle. Now here's an interesting point. Church of the Ascension is now owned by the Muslims. And you go in there, they take a little fee, all your fees are paid for, you don't pay a penny of this, is only the price. But they own it, okay? And then the little church you'll stop by is a Dominus Flevit. This is on the Mount of Olives. And why that little map in the front is good, because you can say, I'm at the Mount of Olives, where the heck is that? You can look and say, oh, that's where the Mount of Olives is. Okay? And that's where Jesus wept over Jerusalem. So the idea is this follows the itinerary. You can keep this with you. The whole second half, and the one that you have who are going on this sojourn, it's a lot more pages than you're going to see this week and next week. So it's nice bedtime reading, you know, because you're not going to get much TV. Unless you want to look at something that big, you know. The Garden of Gethsemane, I wanted to put some of the history in here for you. It literally means oil press. And why? Because there were olive trees there, right? And it's right next to the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, and it's also right next to the Church of All Nations, and it's famous for what holy day? During Holy Week? One day Thursday, right? When he's captured in the garden and he cuts off the ear and he has the God's ear put back on, and Judas has betrayed him, right? So if you follow the path of Jesus, what we call the lectionary cycle, like we're in Christmas now, you'll be able to follow Jesus' path in what he did. That happened in the garden. Here's where he was interned. Here's a church built to represent him here, okay? And that makes it all quite exciting. And I've got the lessons in here as well, okay? So you can read these, and that's an exciting part of the trip because you can literally experience it. You can experience. So you got the Garden of All Nations with the olive trees, where Jesus prayed before. It's relatively small. It's 1,200 square meters. Not very big. And the other thing that right across the way is the Church of All Nations. And that's believed where Jesus stood on the Mount of Olives. Okay? And that's where he prayed supposedly the night before that. This Church of All Nations, at the bottom of page 11, you will go in. It's fabulous inside.
Very pretty church.
What?
Very pretty church.
A lot of glass inside, a lot of mosaics. You will see almost everything inside these churches is in Latin. And don't be fooled. There'll be people who say to you, translate that for me. You all speak Latin, right?
Yeah.
But here's the trick. You can get a Latin translator on your iPhone. And you can type it in, or use Siri, and say, what does it mean in Latin? And it will tell you. And that adds some richness to the whole story. This is a great church. There'll also be a lot of other people there. You won't be the only ones if you go. Don't think that. And you get tired of falafel and hummus. No, never tired of falafel or hummus, right? But it's a great experience. And by the way, take a little trick. If you want to say, I can't go just now, but I would sure like to be able to see more of this, you can find tons of stuff online with videos and everything else, so you can really experience it. But my advice to people, I don't think it's a place you have to go like Dodie Frost did 9 times. And when she was 92, walked in Petra, walked all the way into the treasury. You know, but I think it's important if you're Christian to go at least once, and I think it's important to go to Turkey at least once. I think it makes your faith come alive. It makes the traditions come alive. When you hear in Monday, Thursday, about what's happened in the Garden of Gethsemane, you can say, you get a picture in your head, and you begin to understand the context of the Gospels and the Gospel writers much more completely and much more meaningfully as you go through this. I got a nice page in here on the garden, okay, and I got the scriptural references. Okay, so you can see those. So if you go, you can actually be well prepared when you go there, have the scripture readings in front of you, and hopefully that makes a difference. I don't know what Mark will do. The guides are usually very good. Okay, they're usually very good. But I'd give Mark a little bit of a hard time. Ask him questions he probably doesn't have the answers to. That's the most fun part of it. This is all under our stoles in here, right? Or I'll never preach again. This could be the last time. But no, seriously, it really makes a difference in your spiritual life by going there and understanding this story. You'll go visit the Garden Tomb and the Holy Sepulchre, and there's many arguments about where that Garden Tomb really is. There's some reasons, and when you get to the Holy Sepulchre, the church, which has just been totally rebuilt, okay, this is one of these conflicts again, where the Garden Tomb, Scripture tells us Jesus was buried in a new tomb, right? Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, right? Okay. But this is the tomb they say he was buried in, some scholars. So only one little problem. It was not a new tomb. So who's right? Again, don't want to bust your bubbles, but that's one of the conflicts. They're constantly finding new stuff and new sites in the Middle East. And one of the reasons is, it's like Jericho. You're not going to go to Jericho. Jericho's phenomenal. I mean, you can really spend at least 2-3 full weeks over there, easy, right? Dan?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Maybe more. I mean, I'd like to take you to Petra. Petra's spectacular. And you know what you can do? They got kids there. You got kids there, BJ, selling real ancient Roman coins.
And Bill bought one of them. And Bill bought one.
I bought several. Are you kidding me? An heirloom like that? Like
$5 each.
for $5 each.
How much was it worth?
5 cents.
It was one of your better investments.
That was one of my better investments. Go ask my wife. But there'll be a lot of things that they'll take dollars. That's not a problem. Everything gets negotiated in some way. Okay. And there's lots of, and I bought those coins for other reasons. They make nice little special gifts for people. When you tell them, you can tell them a true story. Come from Petra. Did? Don't laugh, it's true.
From the treasury.
From the treasury. They sell those coins. They said they found them in the treasury. So like you'll see these little conflicts, which is why I like to do these little classes for you, because you can then rationalize some of that away. So Dome of the Rock on page 14, we talked a little bit about that. It was built on top of the temple in 688. okay, and it was covered with a lead dome from 691, and they finally in the 60s replaced it with a gold dome, okay, and it's it's amazing when the sun reflects off it, how bright it is, okay, and of course then at the bottom of that page you see the Western Wailing Wall, which is separated for men and for women. And if you see this little door down here on this left side, at the bottom of page 14, that's where the rabbis will pray back there with the Torah. And you can go back in there, and I highly recommend it.
You want to go back in there?
Yeah, they'll let you in there. Yeah, they'll let you in there. The thing to be always, no matter where you are, BJ will tell you this, right, BJ?
I don't know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, Lou knew what I was saying. Isn't that a great straight line? Is be respectful. Because what in the U.S. we might not see as being disrespectful, they might see it as disrespectful there. You know, so as long as you're respectful, as long as you're courteous, right, BJ?
Yes,
That's really a key. You've lived there
yes, and cover.
and
A
covered. You know, no
Not sundress.
bikinis, ladies. Not even on the Dead Sea, right? That would not be considered respectful. You know, so cover, being respectful, and you'll be just fine, right, BJ?
Yes, you'll be fine.
You'll be fine. And don't wear expensive jewelry. Don't wear your Rolex. This one's 37 years old. It's my grandfather's. But just not a good idea. There are pickpockets around, okay? I don't think where you're going it's going to be a problem, but it's just like you're doing any international travel, it just makes common sense. I think on day 3 you'll go into the old city and see the pool of Bethsaida rather. Okay, and Sheep's Gate as you go into the old city through the eastern gate, okay, and into the Via della Rosa and into the Muslim Quarter, and there's this church there with Chapel of Flagellation that's got these incredible acoustics inside. Remember that? And it's because of the way they made. It's amazing the acoustics these engineers could get, and these designers could get in this era, by just being conscious of how sound reflects off material, the what materials, and building parabolic shapes into parts of the churches so that they get reflection back. And the acoustics without any electronic aids are pretty phenomenal in some of these places. And you'll get a chance to experience that and a lot of medieval architecture when you go through that. So again, you're going to see a lot of churches. A lot of churches, a lot of cool places. Via della Rosa. How many stations of the cross are there in Scripture? 9. How many do we normally celebrate? 14. And because there's implied stations. So when you start that, if you look at the top of page 16, and believe it or not, the guide will even, they'll provide a cross for you to carry. You don't have to carry it, Jim. You don't have to. They'll provide a cross for you to carry. There's always a Good Friday procession there from the Mount of Olives. Okay? The station numbers are hard to find. There's 9 of them. And the last 4 are in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which has just been remodeled. And they did a lot of archaeological work there recently, and they actually found that under where the tomb was, they dated it back to Jesus' time, which is pretty impressive. You know, so these little points come along. But when you go down, and I have in the document that you're taking with you, I have the prayers to be prayed at each station. So you can literally walk the stations and you can pray those prayers, okay, if you choose to. And it's crowded, and the best way I could describe it to you, it's like going to one of these narrow mall markets in Tijuana.
Sure.
You know, they're selling trinkets and all kinds of stuff,
It's
right?
not a religious experience.
It's not a religious experience. You know, which brings up another point. Each of you who go are going to have to discern for yourselves where you found Jesus. I didn't on the Via Dolorosa at all. I didn't in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at all, with the CFL light bulbs hanging from cords from the ceiling, wondering why. Why? They don't like to use candles. You know why? Risk of fire. But I did feel the presence of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. When you get up there, you touch the water, you say, this is where he was. I felt it more there than any other place. But the Via Dolorosa would be a great experience because we do it here all the time, right? We do it here all the time. So that's really, really good. And they still do it on Good Thursday, okay? And it's quite an experience. The Chapel of Flagellation is noted for when he was flayed. Okay, you'll see that, and you'll see a lot of Latin in there. You'll be able to look at that. Beautiful church. You can take pictures at almost all of these places, but just look for signs. And if it says no pictures, probably a good idea not to. And I'll tell you the other place, they'll tell you this. If when you go to the West Bank and you come back, the Israelis get on the bus with their Uzis, okay, or their ARs, okay, and they look at everybody and they look at passports and all of that, and that's all fine. But don't take your camera out and try to take pictures of the wall or their security measures at the wall. They will warn you about that. They will warn you about that. I don't think anything will happen to you if you try to, except be told no. But just that whole issue of respectfulness again. So by now your feet hurt? Okay, and now you're going to have one of life's incredible experiences. You're going to visit the West Bank. And on page 18. And if you think Tijuana looks poor, go to the West Bank. And if you think the West Bank is poor, go to Gaza. Okay? But of course, you got to go to the West Bank because that's where there's Bethany, right? That's where all those other critical sites are. No problem getting over there. They have a local police, okay? They really don't have a government. It's safe. I think it's safe. Same rules again. Same rules again. Don't do anything crazy, okay? But it's controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And you'll see things that you only heard someone talk about, like meat markets with all the meat hanging outside and flies all over the place. All right? And say, that's what I'm having for lunch. But seriously, you'll see how poor it is. I remember asking someone from the Palestinian Authority, and Bishop Graffiti was very welcome over there. That's where he started the school in Ramallah. And one of the things that's a real blessing if you go is Jill Henderson is really an expert. And you say, well, why don't they clean the place up? And they say, because they want to be able to blame the Israelites.
They want to what?
Blame the Israelites.
Blame the Israelites.
Without supporting them, yeah. So it's, it's
Cut
a
off
bit
the
of a
nose to
conflict.
spite the face.
But the most exciting places to see are over on the West Bank. A Church of the Nativity is spectacular. You go in through a little door that's about 4 feet high. I'm on page 19, okay? And you wait. There's phenomenal picture opportunities in there. You go down a little staircase, and supposedly this is where Jesus was born. It was built in the 2nd century, okay? It's a really special place. Sometimes you got to stand on line for how long do you stand on line to get there? Half hour, you know. So it's very, very cool. I think it's one of the special places. But there again, remember, in and or around this place, not necessarily exactly right there. Okay. 20 Church of St. Catherine and the Grotto of St. Jerome. You've heard of the Jerome Bible, right? That translation. This is where supposedly Jerome spent 30 years of his life translating it from Hebrew and Greek into Latin, okay? And it's another one of these historic places you go, now I can really see and begin to understand how that happened. There's lots of good stuff you can buy in these places, crosses, trinkets, ironwood things. And by the way, when we have those folks from Jerusalem here, a lot of that they bring from the Holy Land and they make over there. And they're, of course, as some of you know, the relatives of the Capitis. Shepherd's Field on 21, you'll go in there and you'll see the Shepherd's Fields, okay? And I know we had a little bit of, some of you were very disappointed. I said Jesus was probably not born in December. This is where it comes from. You'll see the kind of buildings they had. They housed the shepherds in, okay? So one of the things I think that's striking, you can find this online too, you can stand there, which is near the West Bank, looking towards where they've built settlements, where the Israelites have built settlements. And what do you view these settlements like? I never viewed them as very much, you know. I went over there for the first time in the 70s. But you realize these have got movie theaters, beautiful paved condos. I mean, they're permanent settlements. You know, they're just not something that's been cobbled together as some people would like to make us think. There's places that you wouldn't mind living in at all, and they're continuing to build them, okay, to have more and more occupation. So Shepherd's Field will be fun. And then on 22, you'll go to the upper room. What upper room are we talking about when they take you to Adoration Abbey? What upper room?
Room of the Last Supper.
Room of the Last Supper. Is it the actual room of the Last Supper?
Built about 1,000 years too late.
Built
Probably
about
not.
1,000 years too late. So it was a recreation. But it's nice to have gone there. It probably was in that area, okay? The structure's 1,000 years old, so that makes it worthwhile. And probably within and or about that space, okay? And in every one of these sites, there's people selling stuff. So you won't have a problem spending your money on stuff, Holly. Okay, there's a lot of stuff that you can buy. Okay, and then you go to St. Peter in Canterville, where Peter denied Christ. Okay, and it's in all four Gospels. Okay, and this is a fabulous place as well. And most of these places are very easy to access. Okay, so there'd be no problem with any of that. But again, if you follow the Gospels and Jesus' ministry for those 3 years, you will be able to follow it very, very well. Ramallah in the West Bank is where Bishop Kafidi built the school for the kids, and it's a very busy place. I think it's a pretty safe place. When I got off the airplane in Tel Aviv, I realized that I could drag all this photography stuff with me. I had cracked the filter on a 50mm lens, and the guide said, I know where to get you one. I'll get you one at Ramallah. So we're in Ramallah, and sure enough, it's a very modern photography store selling everything imaginable. Okay? And they only spoke Arabic, so luckily the guide I was with did speak Arabic, but you know, it's a very modern city compared to the rest of the place. But it's chaotic and it's loud. Chaotic and it's loud. But we hear a lot about Ramallah on the news all the time, right, in the West Bank. So one of the wonderful things about going is you'll have experienced it. And again, I think that makes the difference. Got a couple of pictures here. I had on page 25. You can see what the traffic is like now. Could have that been downtown Tijuana? Right, or something like that. You find all kinds of little things to buy. You'll find barbershops out in the street corners, a lot of fruit and vegetables, DJ, you've been there many times, I know over there.
No,
Not the Ramallah?
no.
Okay. But it was a good experience. Traffic is insane. Traffic laws are only recommendations. Will you make eye contact?
Suggestions.
And suggestions.
Not as bad as Naples, though.
Not as bad, nothing's as bad as Naples. But I think you'll find that that's just not a theological experience, that's a contemporary modern times experience, when you experience that. And you always hear about it, in the news and on paper. It's a fun place to go. So that's what we have for this week. Next week, we'll finish the other half. I can only have one recommendation. She's got 2 slots left. I think someone backed out, I think Jill told me. So, if any of you last minute say, gee, I'd like to do it, there's still time. There's still time. Because it is a very good trip. I try when I go, I'd probably do it a little differently than Mark would do it. As many of you know, I like to look at the history, I like to look at the architecture. I'm a history buff when it comes to this stuff. I like to correlate it to scripture. We would do renewal of marriage vows. We did that in Cana. But I'm not so much about doing Compline every night and that kind of stuff. I'd rather talk to people about where we're going to go next and what's going to happen. So I'm in Cana. I don't know if I told you the story or not, but it's a cute one. So Jill had managed to get us to chapel, and being a deacon, I took the reserved sacrament with me, and I got it into the country. No one checked. They probably wouldn't have let me otherwise. So I got it in there. We had a chapel, and the nuns were there. It's a Roman Catholic chapel, of course. And what happened in Cana? And so we got the chapel, and the nuns had all the vestments laid out. They're very, very helpful. And before we went, we said, okay, you guys are in the choir, so you guys are going to be part of the choir. I took a liturgy with me. We actually had the liturgy. It's in the book. I'm not going to do it with you guys here. And we did this wonderful service, the renewal of vows. All had communion, and there were people who were in the altar guild, so everybody had a job. Everybody had a job. There were about the 20 some of us who went. And then the nuns have a little store across the street. But you see, when you go with me, you got to party a little bit. So after renewal of vows, I say when we went back to St. Margaret's, the care center, the retreat center, I said, if your vows are renewed, you have to pay for the reception. If your vows are renewed, you got to pay for the reception. So we're over there, and the nuns are selling all kinds of stuff. They sell original Cana wine. The first miracle.
Oh, wow.
A little old.
Tastes like wild stuff.
Did you have a question here?
So the other thing is that everyone does their own, all the clergy do their own thing. I don't wear my collar much over there. I don't want to be targeted.
Yeah.
And I always wear a tab collar so I can put the tab in my pocket. Okay? But like for that, I wear a collar. Sometimes I would. So anyway, we're standing online, and people are buying wine, and they're buying Ritz crackers and all this stuff. Falafel, I never want to see falafel again on my lip. Okay, they're buying all this stuff, and I had my collar on, and one nun says, I get about 4 bottles of wine and some other stuff, and the nun says to me, where are you from, Father? So I said, San Diego. Oh, how nice. What are you doing? He said, well, we just renewed vows, and we're going to have a little reception tonight at St. Margaret's. Oh, that's wonderful. She said, well, have a good time. She said, just take this. I'm not going to charge you for it. That's when you wear your collar.
You didn't go on with that deception of this poor nun, did you?
Huh? Oh, yes.
Oh. Surprised lightning didn't strike.
Yeah. Okay, so I got to get back to work, so we'll cut this a little short. By the way, you probably know that the lesson that's in there for the gospel is wrong. You know that, right? It's second Christmases that's in there. Yeah. So, I don't do the bulletins anymore.